Hello. Today I'm going to talk about shifting left and whether automation can fix the information security and risk management bottleneck. The central question to this presentation today that we're going to answer is shifting left for government projects, where security outcomes are prioritized by adaptive risk management and facilitated through new automation. Is that a simple technical problem? No, that's why we're in the leadership track of this wonderful conference today. I'm going to go through the background with the big picture. I'm going to talk about why we're here to discuss that and why we should care. I hope we all do. What holds us back from making this easy if the answer is an emphatic no? Are we honest enough about the present and future of our security posture to make that not as difficult moving forward? And why do we care and how do we fix it? Hopefully, if you're still here with me, you still care about it, and we'll talk about why we are going to fix it and what's changed to make this urgent enough that I want to talk about this and be passionate about it today, now. And then we're going to get into some key assumptions that are holding us back. If this isn't a simple technical lift, there might be some things that we believe about our information security programs and what we call in the government risk management programs. And if we don't change those assumptions, no amount of automation or no late-breaking developments in security automation are going to matter. So there are quite a few of them, more after the commercial break. My name is Alexander Stein, and if you want to know why you're listening to me today, I do digital service delivery Flexion focused on security projects. I work with federal agency customers, and before that, I worked with military customers. You'll see below a variety of different titles for the work that I've done in these projects. My favorite is the one at the bottom. You'll notice that I crossed out compliance engineering, wrote risk management and engineering quotes. I work in a lot of integrated DevOps teams, and a lot of people believe that compliance, information security oversight, and risk management, we'll get more into what that means later, are not inherently engineering or structured technical disciplines. I would disagree. In my current projects, I work on the adoption of a information security data exchange standard called OSCAL that's sponsored by the federal government, both professionally and recreationally. So I have a vested interest and a passion about changing this perception. So if you're listening to me still, why are you taking my advice? That was a trick question. This isn't advice. I would not believe that you should just take anything I say wholesale. These are my opinions. They're based on experience and, as I like to call them, anecdata. It's not about my work in one agency or one project or one situation. I see repeat themes with all these things, and I think you will if you're in this audience. There's no need to call out bad apples. There's good and bad everywhere, and there's no need to change the names to protect the innocent. So let's get started. Why are we here? Before we get started, though, let's just clear one thing up. Shifting left. I hear the term used a lot, but I'll just define what it means to me. In a technical project, there are a variety of priorities. We have to understand all of them and know all of them and where they are placed in relationship of importance to each other and in what sequence they actually need to be started and completed. Shifting left means moving some of those earlier and earlier in the life cycle to make sure that the quality is better, they're finished faster and earlier, or one or more of the combination of those. So why is that so important in the US government and the military? Obviously, you might not all in the audience be part of the public sector, or especially the United States. I'm interested in working in US government projects because they have big goals, large impacts, and insane budgets. They represent a macro case study in some of the largest enterprise projects for information technology and any other kind of project in the world in many cases. So if they can't shift left, if they can't improve security outcomes, who can? They also, most importantly, as a sector, many government agencies for their information security oversight want to be perceived as the most secure. That's an important objective to them because risking the reputation of government services means inherently way more in the public sector than in some cases in the private sector. Well, I guess an important question would be, how secure are they? This has been kind of a banner year for exploits and breaches of public government systems. I think anyone who's been paying attention to the news might be familiar with SolarWinds. This is a Department of Homeland Security emergency directive, and there are other directives that I've listed below. These are representative of the threat landscape and things that are actually compromising systems in the federal government. This might be a banner year, and the years prior, this is not much of a surprise. Most people, even insiders, federal employees, and contractors, but also outsiders as well, begin to reflect and say, if these breaches are happening, and the government wants this perception and tries to realize this perception through running very comprehensive information security oversight programs, and I'll get more into those later and how they work, people still reflect and go, gee, are these actually reaching the outcomes we want them to reach? Even insiders like this person I cite here in this Twitter thread, this is a person that was working in one agency in the federal government and now works like for the chief advisor for the Office of Management and Budget, so like the head CIO. he is not that unique in that people often reflect that we want bigger, better security outcomes from our government IT projects, whether modern or conventional. But a lot of this oversight is seen often as a mindless checklist, and it's taking away from, as I point out in the right part of the other thread, it's taking away from money and energy and resources for technical qualitative security analysis and improving and investing those projects. So if I'm here today and I believe that those checklists are only mindless and they don't have value, then maybe this is easy. We can just stop talking. But fortunately for you in this presentation, I'm going to explain that maybe there is some value to it, and it's not all black and white. It's not binary. So how do we fix that? In the federal government, we shouldn't be focusing on compliance programs, or at least that's what the required body of governance around information security and compliance is really called risk management in federal government programs. We'll get more into that in a little bit. But that perspective of using conventional, just check all the boxes, meet all the things, and just comply has been old school for quite a while now. The documentation and the guidance is updated every several years, and for over a decade, it should not be applied this way. But whether you're in a program that has this more conventional, rigorous, old school, comply, check all the boxes, or this more adaptive, progressive, risk-based system, I hear similar things from colleagues that are both federal employees and contractors. Almost all these information security oversight processes are almost always rigorous, they're inflexible, and they're anti-agile. Whether or not you apply the Agile Manifesto and use Agile with a capital A in your programs, whether you're public sector or your private sector, I believe that these three highlights from what is considered Agile are things that reflect what most information security oversight in the government is not. And these are important cultural problems. But that being said, I am passionate, I believe many other people as US citizens or people working in the government do believe that the mission essential functions of the federal government are important. There's a national continuity plan that's overseen by the executive, by the president, other people that lead the government. And we have to understand that security is supposed to help protect and maintain and move up production services to citizens that are important. It might be ensuring healthcare and billing works for key government services, things in national security and defense. These processes have to work. And I believe that the perception and the reality of being secure and wanting to be the most secure are valuable. But most importantly, having good security tactics is still not as good as having good security tactics that are defined by a coherent security strategy. Because if not, you'll have gaps. And these services will either be delivered in insecure manners, or unfortunately, they will be not delivered at all or way, way behind schedule. And citizens will actually, like us, suffer the consequences. And so if we feel that there are inefficiencies and there are gaps in secure versus non-secure or efficient versus not efficient, what is holding us back? As I pointed out before, there's usually a perception gap between what's really happening and what we document on paper. And I believe that in most cases, and in my personal experiences, people will disagree. But in many cases, there are gaps and they're significant. But why is that? Why is that a consistent theme in the US government technical projects, or even in large enterprises more generally? If we talk about security oversight, risk management, compliance, whatever variety or flavor or theme you use to describe that, or actual security implementations, we can talk about capabilities or these goals that we have about how we intend to secure a system. Most generally, if we look at them, they're often hard to understand. They're usually hard to resource in terms of the right people or the right tools. They're also hard to design, even if you have those things, if you have the right people and tools. And having those people or an external objective group of people assess or audit them in a way that is correct and easily identifiable and repeatable is very difficult. So maybe we could just perceive this as a big waste of time. I'm joking because Eric Mill and other people in the government, we often use whether current events are really, really big or really, really small when it comes to security breaches. Some people believe that this is an inherent waste of time. Maybe nothing's holding us back at all. We can just accept the status quo, say that honesty is hard, and when we have to focus on weak spots, it's better we don't bring it up. Everyone in the government functions this way. Why worry? So, of course, we're shifting left, right? Everyone says they are, and no one would admit that they're not improving security outcomes and prioritizing security earlier in the life cycle. But jokes aside, hence the winky face, there are some key assumptions about how we run information security programs in realizing those goals with or without this automation standard I'm talking about. And now I'm going to talk about a little about those assumptions that I've experienced and how they're going to hold back the adoption of OSCAL and OSCAL-based tooling. The key one that I've hinted at earlier in these presentations is that we do adaptive risk management and not old school compliance. I feel a lot of people assert this in government programs. But let's step back for a second. I'd like to joke that when people say they're compliant, I ask with what? It's very weird when people use the word compliance and they use it without a preposition and, more importantly, without a noun after that preposition. There are lots of regulatory and legal frameworks that any information technology program has to comply with. So what are we really complying with? Typically in the federal government, they mean a common thing. They're talking about the risk managed framework. In the U.S. government, compliance program and risk managed program are often used as terms interchangeably when we're really talking about the latter. And a risk managed program that's adaptive should inform the priorities of a security system and the capabilities. The strategic goals and capabilities drive down into the security implementations. So that's how risk management and security should be in a continuum with each other. However, most people are focused on the old school compliance driven, let's check all the boxes view. Is that how the risk management framework should be used? Probably not. 837 is a framework that tells you how to adopt the lifecycle. 853 is the companion document that many people dread in the risk management framework that itemizes hundreds and hundreds of security requirements that any system has to comply with or at least adjust to. It's actually meant to be adaptive. No one uses a web server or a web application framework like Django and then configures all the configuration settings and then hopes it works. They're meant to be adaptive. But do people actually make it adaptive? More often than not, no. Do people take all the controls in this 853 document and then mandate all of them and make it very difficult to comply with all of them at the same time? More often than not, yes. This is not real risk management. This is a compliance mindset. And should we be using empirical risk decisions to inform risk management capabilities? Yes, they should. I only point that FedRAMP recently published a white paper on this, and soon they'll be publishing data to support it and show how you can use that in your own programs, although very few people do it, even though they talk about it. To comply is easy and just take all the requirements and mandate them. Adapting them to your environment, like 837 says, when they give you this list of configurable requirements in 853, is a much bigger ordeal. So what is the impact with and to OSCAL? Compliance capabilities need to be designed for purpose for programs at the organization level and at individual project level, and not engineered well into the process of developing an application or deploying it into your environment. It shouldn't be engineered after the fact. Now, this should seem intuitive, but in a lot of places and in a lot of ways, as we get further in this presentation, you'll understand that this is actually a real problem from a cultural perspective in the government, if not any large enterprise. CISOs and their compliance teams, yes, they still call themselves that, even though I said in the slide they shouldn't, must understand engineering cultures, like we talk about DevSecOps, to inform them. We have to take these high-level goals, these organizational requirements and capabilities, and then drive them down and properly map them into requirements at the implementation level and how these DevOps platforms should be configured by using engineering leadership in your organization to connect the dots, not let the frontline engineers figure it out as we go. Version controlling risk management and security strategy, at thinking the way the engineers do, and iteratively taking documents and pieces of data and making small changes and versioning those changes in data and then disseminating it out like open source code, like your engineers love and appreciate when doing their work, is very foreign, is something they're going to have to adapt in the leadership of your organizations to make this automation worth it when they build automation tools to disseminate the data programmatically between organizations and inside of organizations as well. Engineering adaptive machine readable policy is really only something that is it's only easily achieved for the most honest, very advanced organizations that are very mature. And if you can't be honest about how mature your organization is about the things I've mentioned thus far, you have a lot of work on prioritizing culture shifts before you can even adopt this automation. Another fun byproduct of that assumption that people hold near and dear is that people believe they understand the compliance and security are in fact different things. I've seen a lot of people assert that, but even if we talk about the risk management framework, like I've talked about before, and we talk about how you handle the goals of a properly risk managed program, we'll talk buzzword bingo. That's the C word. That's capabilities. So these goals are similarly named for both compliance goals and security goals. And I even joked before, we should call them risk management goals, but most people call them compliance goals anyway. Some of them overlap when we talk about the compliance risk management stuff, the high-level strategic stuff, and then the security implementation stuff. But they are, in fact, almost always different things, even though if they're interrelated. I think industry has also made it somewhat worse, and this isn't just a government thing. A lot of people lump this all together when they talk about cybersecurity. It's all the same thing when you're a cybersecurity specialist. So, like I said before, if we talk about this idea of compliance or risk management, those are high-level strategic capabilities where you focus policies, how you staff, how you focus a larger information security program, how you focus a privacy program, and how those drive down into security requirements, into security capabilities. The low-level implementation, how day-to-day systems are managed and deployed through procedures and processes and guidelines, how you configure those systems with baselines. They're connected, and there's a continuum from high-level strategy into low-level implementation, and they should be a continuum. They shouldn't be like a giant jaggedy edge and you drop off the cliff between them. Compliance and security people in the US government projects, unfortunately, even though they believe they're working on the same things, are very different people. Their cultures are different. Their languages are most often different. And to make matters worse, very often there is no incentive or there's no structure where they're repeatedly interacting with each other. Their touch points are very limited and formal. So all that is nice. I just wanted to make sure that if people didn't understand, I've used a very common document that I use to keep myself straight when talking about the difference between these high-level objectives that we're trying to reach with these capabilities and how policies dovetail into these lower-level implementations. But even I need to keep this straight in my head at times, and also the mapping between them is often very, very seldom focused on. So there's a lot of disconnects in any organization, no matter how large, no matter how small or how large. The federal government is no different. So what's the impact into OSCAL? Security data is sometimes structured, and often this compliance data, even though it should be called risk managed, right? Compliance data is almost always unstructured. And OSCAL is a government-led initiative to necessarily connect them to each other. So this is going to have, from a leadership perspective, let that sink in. There has to be a lot of emphasis on structured, intentional, managed view of what the security oversight, this risk management process in your organization at the highest levels, usually in the C-suite, how they do it in small, controlled, piecemeal ways and how they send it out to other people. That's going to be a prerequisite. Another fun part of this, a lot of people believe that they understand all their technical risks and that they're easy to manage in a system. So many in the audience, or maybe some of you have not been subjected to this common security certification that is very common and encouraged, and in some cases required for federal employees or contractors that touch systems with high security risks. This is the CISSP. So the CISSP talks a lot of the background of authorization frameworks, not just the risk management one for the US federal government, but a lot of them. But that aside, when they talk, even the official textbooks about the person that signs off, there's always a federal employee that signs off on these systems being ready to go, to be promoted to production. The authorizing official is talked about as an informed, well-intentioned person that knows everything. In my personal experience, the AO is not always a technical expert. The AO sometimes hasn't taken any technical exams at all, or if they do have they have technical skills, they aren't even applicable, or they haven't been for the last decade or so, and is usually a federal employee and needs to consult with others. And we want them to. It is about empathy. There are cultural and organizational standards that are, if not written down, well understood by the federal employees, and sometimes their peers and the leaders of these authorizing officials need to consult each other with them, and they need to talk to each other. Perceiving that the authorizing official can be an all-knowing magic 8-ball of the information technology requirements of the agency is far-sighted. And in that way, it's hard for them to admit confusion or formulate questions on technical points and the inherent risks that they don't understand. That's why they're consulting with these engineering teams and consulting with auditors and cyber risk advisors. So what's the impact of this data standard and how it will be used? Like I said, risk managers and frontline engineers live very different lives. Neither structure the data the same way, if at all. And it's difficult or sometimes impossible to track risks and mitigations for complex stuff. The world is interconnected. The internet is a series of tubes. And if these systems are connected, risks are rarely like on an island unto themselves. These systems, when they have risks, they can propagate into other systems. So it's important that these automation tools, before they're deployed, that leadership in an agency, in any organization at their size as well, prioritize these high level authorizing officials and information security officers, the people that are supposed to help prepare these systems before they go to production, be very tightly integrated and have very, very strong bidirectional communication about the risks in the system and often review them. And without that, no amount of OSCAL data automation is going to change the underlying problem, which is a lot of people oversell the idea that they understand all the technical risks in their systems for government IT projects. And much like that, a lot of people believe that they know everything they deploy in an environment. Let me tell you, surprise, surprise to I'm sure everyone in the audience, digital services, new or old, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, no matter how conventional or how greenfield it is, they are not static. Systems change. The impact with and to OSCAL is that for any kind of U.S. government oversight, very often the people that do these audits for risk management before a system can be authorized to go to production are not adjacent or even able to see or talk to the people that should be at the infrastructure level that manage inventory, no matter how accurate it is, even in the cloud. I am one of many people I know in my profession that have had to write shell scripts or Python scripts that take all the cloud inventory of all the servers and other services and then put them in a CSV file that auditors don't see for days, weeks, months. They're usually out of date 5 minutes after they're written to a disk, and they are not seen until months after that. So inventory being static and slow to move is a risk. And these tools that are going to be written with OSCAL are going to require that you actually embed the inventory as part of every kind of document that you use to show a system is ready to go. And so another problem is that the OSCAL data standard is much more expressive about the kinds of things you inventory. And a lot of people just inventory a couple of servers on-prem, or in the cloud, they'll take like the AWS or Azure servers that you can deploy manually and talk about the IP addresses of those, not the modern serverless or container-based platforms and how to inventory them. OSCAL requires that and expects there to be structure. And it's more often than not, many people do not understand the boundary, this area of responsibility, where you talk about this part of the system is really what your production authorization is about. Like what parts of the inventory are really in there and are not in there. This data standard is going to require that you have very accurate inventory and understand exactly everything that is or isn't in your boundary. So very clearly understand whether your dev or user acceptance testing environment is actually a touching or is considered production. And if you still do that right, you still have to worry about auditors who know exactly how to assess systems. I think a lot of people believe that auditors are completely knowledgeable on the technical risks, and that's why after you've compiled all this information and before you get an authority to operate and you're ready to go for production, that the auditors will suss out anything that's not right, and that all will be well. I will say assessing documents is easy. Building an experienced assessment organization is hard. I've met people in the industry and they say for third-party assessors, specifically for FedRAMP actually has companies that are cloud service providers pay for their auditors instead of the federal government in most cases. And then they give that assessment to the cloud service provider to present it to the government. The average shelf life of an informed auditor in one of those organizations is 5 years. So let that sink in. That they rotate out really fast. It's hard to maintain that kind of knowledge about heterogeneous systems for only 5 years at a time. Even if you take 2 auditors from one organization that does this auditing, or you take them from 2 different organizations, whether they're from the same or different company, assessors can have opinions and biases, and objectivity is a privilege and not a right. There's a huge problem where 2 people can look at the same system, have very different impressions about how they operate. What's the impact with to OSCAL about that? Assessment plans will become increasingly consistent. So siloing expertise and not sharing standards about how you test the system will eventually come with penalties. Agencies themselves or external assessment organizations like FedRAMP that help different parts of the federal government or anything in between will be able to compare assessment plans and the results that these auditors give. And these oversight bodies will have a much better time as tooling evolves to understand what is common and what is above the watermark in terms of the quantity and quality of findings that are found in these audits. So results will also be inherently connected to a structured action results, and those will be further defined by how they connect it to the system security plan, these documents that tell how all these systems meet the security requirements, and there are hundreds of them. So all of the interconnected data points between from the definition of the system as it's designed and implemented to how it's tested and the results will be way more structured. So it will be much harder to hide the inconsistencies or the kind of happenstance nature of how audits are performed. And even if we get through all the audits, we have to know that a lot of people believe that they know a lot of or all the weaknesses in their systems, how to mitigate them, and they know how to predict breaches. That is a tough pill to swallow. Whether or not you've been breached actively, and if you have any weakness in your system for any kinds of system that is managed by the risk management framework in some way, you're supposed to have a POAM. A POAM is basically the to-do for your information system and all the security problems you may or may not find. The best part is some of them might not be about your information system, like the actual server or services that you're deploying. Some of them are systemic issues for your whole engineering work or agency, and those get tracked too, although I noticed that most of the time they're underreported or they languish for years even though they shouldn't. So these things are the byproduct of an auditor taking an assessment plan and testing things and putting them in a security assessment report. And these POAMs are supposed to be looked at through the authorization cycles. Security problems are supposed to be declared if they can't be negotiated or fixed as part of the assessment result review. And these are important things to track and actually fix over time. Although in most cases, with or without automation, I've seen that these usually lag and are very much underdefined. In the real world, we would hope that POAMs would be driven by threat modeling of the applications and risk assessments of the business processes that these applications are to define, and they should actually go somewhere. They should be detailed and thorough. And when we're breached, if we're breached, but more often than not, we should assume breach in this modern world, we should know how and why it was possible when we can. We can't be perfect, but we should know where our mitigations were weakest or where they were limited and hope that we accurately predicted that we shored up the defenses where it mattered. The places where we were attacked, we knew that that's where we were weakest and we can improve it. Achievable mitigations that can't be done in these POAMs, this is a list of things that it's like a to-do list. This is like just-in-time budgeting for your staff and for your money and for your technical resources. An associate of mine, Elisa Fiola, in government, she actually brought this viewpoint to my attention. I had never realized that I also had never internalized it, even though I found government memoranda from the Office of Management and Budget, the people that tell federal agencies how to behave with security and other things that imply this. So what's the impact with it to OSCAL? Any POAMs and any findings are usually considered inherently bad in the government, and that's why they're underreported. This is going to have to change. Automation is, if anything, is going to make it much easier with this data standard, especially as you communicate from vendors to government and back and forth, that these things need to be handled in near real time and not infrequently reviewed and usually kept far from the purview of the people that need to look at them most, the engineering teams that write the code or deploy the systems, or hopefully both, and understand what things have been mitigated, what things have we prevented in part or in whole through our layered defenses from happening. What are the things that have come up that are new? Have we made sure that they're actually being tracked and communicated up the chain, and that once the people in leadership see them, that they know they're being fixed, or if they haven't been fixed for a long time, flag them. These things are often problems, and the most stickiest of problems I've seen in large government projects, and the fact that these POAMs are hidden deep in a corner ensures that some problems that are fixable and that would probably prevent serious security impacts if discovered, usually separate, because the people that are trying to attack you in the real world are not reading your POAMs, these could have been prevented. So I think those are the key assumptions I want to cover today. In conclusion, I just want to be clear. I know I talked about a lot of authority subjects in government IT projects. The takeaway here is not jaded pessimism. Can OSCAL and next generation automation completely solve these problems that I've discussed? No, but can they actually help you shift left? Yes, but only if you're honest about the cultural changes you have to make. I encourage you to come out to the community and find out more. Below is a link to the official community contribution recommendations from the NIST developers who make OSCAL. And there is a community group that I'm sponsoring to get people in industry and in government to exchange examples and talk about the next best use cases for OSCAL, and that's OSCAL Club. Please feel free to visit.